Trump press secretary Karoline Leavitt was brutally fact-checked and humiliated on Twitter after spreading lies in defense of Donald Trump's disastrous One Big Beautiful Bill, which, as we speak, unfortunately inches closer and closer to passage in the United States House of Representatives. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, Karoline Leavitt is the mouthpiece of the White House. She is Donald Trump's top representative. And again, whether you like it or not, she is the culmination of the MAGA spokesperson. She's better by far than her predecessors, Sean Spicer, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and Kayleigh McEnany. She is vicious. She is cruel. She is quick-witted. She is very smart. Unfortunately, she has a tough job, which is to sell the lies of Donald Trump, which often makes her look like a total dumbass because she's forced to defend the indefensible and lie about the most egregious violations. And we actually have that sort of situation right here, which is she posts on Twitter, which has a right-wing bias, right? It is a pro-Trump, pro-MAGA platform overwhelmingly, about Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. She says, anyone who votes against the One Big Beautiful Bill is voting against no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. And this, of course, not just in her position as White House press secretary, but it was retweeted by the official White House Twitter page. So you have two government accounts representing Donald Trump, brutally fact-checked, okay? And again, I want you to think about that, how egregiously you have to lie to be fact-checked as a MAGA Republican politician on Twitter. Readers added context they thought you people might want to know. The One Big Beautiful Bill does not fully eliminate taxes on tips, overtime, or Social Security as claimed. It offers limited deductions with caps. For example, at $25,000 for tips, $12,500 for overtime, and excludes high earners with no provision to remove taxes on Social Security. So she gets fact-checked in real time. As Common Dream reports, a bit more detail, Trump White House lies about budget bills, tax cuts as U.S. public opposes giveaway to the rich. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt misleadingly touted tax deductions for overtime and tips while neglecting to mention the bill's much larger tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans and large corporations. As the Republican reconciliation bill barrels towards final passage in Congress, the Trump White House is misrepresenting the measure's tax provisions in an attempt to paint the unpopular legislation as a boon for workers and ordinary seniors rather than a massive handout to the wealthiest Americans. In an ex-post late Wednesday, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt declared that any lawmaker who opposes the 887-page bill is voting against no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits. Leavitt's post was sufficiently misleading as to draw a community note on the Elon Musk-owned platform, which clarified that the Republican bill, quote, does not fully eliminate taxes on tips, overtime, or Social Security as claimed. It offers limited deductions and excludes high earners with no provision to remove taxes on Social Security. As Axios reported Thursday, the Republican legislation does include, quote, an increased tax deduction for tax filers age 64 and older, but the benefit, quote, leaves out the poorest seniors and expires in 2028 when Trump is set to leave office. The tax deduction for overtime and tips also expire in 2028, but the tax benefits for the rich, permanent. That's the goal, permanent. Temporary, heavily caveated tax deductions for some tips, for some overtime that have a sunset clause that will expire. But all the handouts to the rich and wealthy, permanent. The Republican priority is always to benefit the rich, period. We have mountains and decades worth of data to support it. Anybody who tells you otherwise, anyone, and I mean this sincerely, I don't care if it's a Republican politician, I don't care if it's your mom or your friend. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you, or they're really stupid, one of the two. We have to be real about this, folks. We really have to be fair. The Republican Party's priorities are about enabling and benefiting financially those who need that enablement and those financial benefits the least. The least. If Republicans and Trump really wanted to get together and carve out a major tax break for middle and lower income families, Democrats would line up to support it. You can do that. In fact, I want to be clear. It is possible. There is no constitutional provision which dictates that a tax cut or a tax cut bill also has to benefit the rich. Spoiler, shocker, you in fact can surgically carve out tax cuts for middle and lower class Americans. You can benefit exclusively the middle and lower class and put the tax burden on higher earners, the people who can shoulder that burden and still live in extraordinary luxury. You can do that. So this idea, well, you got to tolerate the tax cuts for the rich because that's the only way I get my tax cut for poor and middle class. No, sir. No, that's not true. That's just simply how Republicans perpetually design it. They give you table scraps while giving just entire hordes of food, stores of food, to people whose dinner tables are already overflowing with food. They give you table scraps, while their banquet tables over full. They can't possibly eat it all. They hate the poor and middle class, and they love the rich, and they are happy to benefit the rich even more at the expense of the lower and middle class. They just recognize there's potential political liability if they come out and do it, so they give you a little bit and hope you cling to it, when in fact you could get more, and the rich could get less if you elected Democrats, and specifically progressive Democrats. But I digress. Let's continue. That's unlike the major tax breaks for the wealthy that are included in the legislation, which extends soon-to-expire provisions of the 2017 GOP tax law. For example, the new Republican bill would permanently raise the estate tax exemption, allowing ultra-wealthy individuals and married couples to give their heirs up to $15 or $30 million without paying federal taxes. They want to make that permanent. Quote, a married couple worth $30 million, where both spouses die in 2026, would pay some $6 million less under the bill compared with the current law, said the Wall Street Journal, the conservative, Fox-affiliated, Fox sister publication, the Wall Street Journal. Brendan Duke, senior director for the federal budget policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, estimates that the GOP reconciliation bill's tax breaks for the richest 1% are roughly 10 times larger than the tax deductions for tips and overtime combined. I want to repeat that, people, please, and share this. Share this with your conservative family members and friends. Let's get through to them. They are getting screwed by this. Listen, if you're a conservative, if you're a Trump supporter, you don't have to like me. You can find me soy. You can hate my socially liberal politics, whatever. Just think about yourselves and your own financial benefit. Unless you're super rich, Trump's bill is screwing you for the sake of the rich. One more time. Estimates that the GOP reconciliation bill's tax breaks for the richest 1%, the people who need this the least, are roughly 10 times larger. Not 2 times, which would be bad enough, not as large, which would be bad enough, 10 times larger than the tax deductions for tips and overtime, which are supposed to be for the working and lower class, combined. Jesus. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy noted in a recent analysis that the Senate-passed legislation also includes permanent corporate tax breaks involving more generous versions of tax rules for bonus depreciation, research, and limits on interest deduction that lawmakers have attempted to enact in recent years. Contrary to the Trump White House's characterization of the reconciliation bill as an historic middle and working class tax cut, the ITEP found that the richest 1% of Americans would receive a total of $117 billion in net tax cuts in 2026. By contrast, that same source says, quote, the middle 20% of taxpayers on the income scale, a group that has 20 times the number of taxpayers as the richest 1%, would receive less than half that much, $53 billion, in net tax cuts that year, disproportionately benefiting the uber rich. Quote, the effects of Donald Trump's tariff policies alone offset most of the tax cuts for the bottom 80% of Americans, the group added. Quote, for the bottom 40% of Americans, the tariffs impose a cost that is greater than the tax cuts they would receive under this legislation. Survey data released Wednesday by the Data for Progress shows that the Republican legislation is unpopular with the majority of likely U.S. voters. The new poll, conducted between June 27th and July 1st, found that 62% are either somewhat or very concerned about the bill's, quote, cuts to income taxes on wealthy Americans. There you have it, folks. That is why Karoline Leavitt was fact-checked. That is why Karoline Leavitt lied. That is why Karoline Leavitt is doing her best to spin this in Trump's benefit. She is hoping, as unfortunately Trump has been able to do, to pull the wool over the eyes, not just of independents, but also his own MAGA voters, those in the MAGA base or in the right-leaning independent base who are poor and middle class, who are working paycheck to paycheck, who are working class people. They are hoping that you are dazzled by the table scraps they're offering you, that you will totally ignore or forgive the banquet table that they are piling up mountains worth of food that they cannot possibly eat. I hope you don't fall for it. Again, it is possible, believe it or not, for an administration to work with Congress and give tax reform which either disproportionately or only benefits middle and lower class Americans and doesn't disproportionately benefit the rich. That is possible, but not to these Republicans because they don't give a damn. There you have it. Karoline Leavitt ruthlessly fact-checked. I appreciate it. Even on right-wing Twitter, you know you have to lie. You have to lie egregiously to be a right-winger fact-checked on Twitter. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.